In the gilded ballrooms of Boston's elite, a heartbroken law student was about to execute the perfect revenge. What started as a charity gala took a shocking turn when Souta Kurogane returned not as the broken man they'd cast aside, but engaged to the one family member they couldn't control. Souta wasn't your typical scorned lover seeking petty payback. For 6 months, he had spent his life carefully orchestrating an alliance with Charlotte Whitmore, the rebellious cousin who despised her family's values as much as he'd grown to resent their cruelty, and what began as calculated deception would become something far more dangerous than revenge. Genuine love that threatened to destroy everything he'd built. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain against Souta Kurogane's apartment window matched the rhythm of his typing matical, relentless, purposeful. 6 months had passed since the night that shattered everything he thought he knew about love, about family, about his place in the world. 6 months since Victoria Whitmore had delivered the final blow that transformed him from a hopeful romantic into something far more dangerous. His laptop screen glowed in the dim light of his modest Cambridge apartment, a stark contrast to the sprawling Whitmore estate where he'd once imagined building his future. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd left that gilded prison with nothing but his dignity, and even that had been stripped away before he'd reached the front gate. Now, surrounded by law books and case files, he was crafting something far more valuable than the comfortable life he'd lost, a weapon forged from his pain and sharpened by his newfound understanding of how the world truly worked. 6 months ago, memory crashed over him like a tide, as vivid and devastating as the night had happened. He'd arrived at the Whitmore mansion for what he'd believed would be a celebration. Emma had finally agreed to announce their engagement after 3 years of his patient waiting. He'd carried the ring in his pocket for weeks, a symbol of the future he'd worked so desperately to deserve. Instead, he'd walked into his own execution. "Souta, darling, how lovely that you could join us for this special occasion."
Victoria?
Whitmore's voice had dripped with false sweetness as she glided across the marble foyer in her designer gown. The smile on her perfectly sculpted face should have been his first warning to sharp, to satisfied, like a predator, savoring the moment before the kill. Emma had stood frozen beside the grand staircase, her face pale as winter moonlight. For a moment, hope had flickered in his chest. Perhaps she was nervous about the announcement, about finally standing up to her family's subtle disapproval of their relationship. He'd been naive enough to believe that love could conquer their prejudices. "Mrs. Whitmore," he'd replied, forcing warmth into his voice despite the ice growing in his stomach. Emma said, "You wanted to discuss something important?" "With us? Oh yes, very important indeed." Victoria's eyes had glittered with malicious delight. "You see, we're announcing an engagement tonight." Emma's engagement. The words had hit him like physical blows, but the worst was yet to come. To Marcus Sterling, of course, Richard's business partner's son. They'd been promised to each other. Since childhood, surely Emma mentioned it. Victoria's tone had been conversational, as if she were discussing the weather rather than destroying his world. The contracts were signed months ago. We're simply making it official tonight. Ring box in his pocket had felt like lead. 3 years. 3 years of dinners where he'd been subtly reminded of his working-class background. Of charity events where he'd been introduced as Emma's friend from law school. Of family gatherings where he'd been seated at the far end of the table like an unwelcome stranger. He'd endured it all because he'd believed Emma loved him enough to fight for their future. But Emma hadn't said a word. She'd stood there in her pristine white dress, a cruel mockery of the wedding gown he'd imagined her wearing for him. Man let her mother deliver the killing blow. "I believe there's been some misunderstanding," he'd managed, his voice steady despite the earthquake in his chest. "Emma and I have had a lovely friendship." Victoria had cut him off smoothly, which we've all cherished. "But surely you understand that people of our standing have certain obligations, responsibilities that transcend personal preferences." That's when Emma had finally spoken, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Souta. I never meant for you to find out this way. Never meant for you to find out." Not that she'd changed her mind, or that her family had forced her hand. She'd never intended to choose him at all. Engagement to Marcus had been real, while theirs had been nothing but an elaborate deception, perhaps not malicious, but devastating nonetheless. The memory dissolved as Souta's fingers stilled on the keyboard. Even now, months later, the betrayal burned like acid in his veins. But he'd learned to harness that pain, to transform it into something useful. The naive law student who'd believed in the power of love had died that night. In his place sat a man who understood that the world was a chess game, and he'd been foolish enough to play without knowing the rules. Now he knew better. His laptop screen displayed months of meticulous research. Financial records, social media profiles, newspaper clippings, university transcripts, everything he could find about Charlotte Whitmore, Emma's cousin, and the family's black sheep. Where Emma was compliant and eager to please, Charlotte was rebellious and sharp-tongued. Where Emma had embraced her family's values, Charlotte had rejected them, choosing art school in Paris over business school at Harvard. Gallery openings over charity galas, authenticity over approval, she was perfect. The plan had crystallized, slowly, like ice forming on a winter pond. If the Whitmores valued their reputation above all else, then their reputation would be his weapon. And Charlotte, brilliant, independent, family-hating Charlotte, would be his willing accomplice. His phone buzzed with a text from Helen Chen, his best friend from law school, and the only person who truly understood what the Whitmore betrayal had cost him. Still planning your grand revenge? You know, I think this is a terrible idea, right? Souta smiled, the first genuine expression to cross his face all day. Helen's concern was touching, but misplaced. She still saw him as the idealistic young man who'd believed that working hard and loving deeply would be enough to overcome class barriers. That man was gone, replaced by someone far more pragmatic. He typed back, "It's not revenge, it's justice." Her response came immediately. "Same thing, different packaging. Be careful, Souta. Don't lose yourself in this." Too late for that, he thought, but didn't reply. Instead, he returned to his laptop and pulled up Charlotte's Instagram profile. Her most recent post showed a painting she'd completed, abstract figures in vibrant colors that seemed to be breaking free from dark restraints. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to destroy something beautiful to create something true." How perfectly poetic. Tomorrow afternoon, Charlotte would be at the Museum of Fine Arts for the opening of a contemporary exhibit, he'd confirmed. It through 3 different sources: a gallery newsletter she'd shared, a friend's tagged photo, and the museum's own social media. She'd be alone, as she always was at these events, observing from the periphery rather than networking like a proper Whitmore. Souta closed the laptop and moved to his closet, selecting the charcoal gray suit he'd purchased specifically for this moment. Not too expensive, he couldn't afford to arouse suspicion about his sudden financial improvement, but well-tailored enough to catch her attention. He'd learned that Charlotte appreciated authenticity, which made his approach delicate. She had to believe that their meeting was genuine, their connection real, and perhaps, in some small way, it would be. As he prepared for bed, Souta caught his reflection in the bathroom mirror. The man staring back at him had the same dark hair and intelligent eyes, but something fundamental had changed. There was a hardness there that hadn't existed before, a calculating coldness that would have horrified his former self. The Whitmores had created this version of him with their cruelty and their class prejudice.
Ow.
They would live with the consequences. Tomorrow, he would begin the careful work of winning Charlotte's trust. Within a month, he would have her agreement to their mutually beneficial arrangement. And then, when the time was right, he would return to their golden world, not as the lovesick fool they'd dismissed, but as something far more dangerous, a man with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The thought should have troubled him. Instead, it filled him with the first sense of purpose he'd felt since that devastating night 6 months ago. Souta Kurogane was coming home. The afternoon light filtering through the Museum of Fine Arts glass ceiling cast everything in golden hues, but Souta's focus remained laser-sharp on the figure standing before a massive Jackson Pollock painting. Charlotte Whitmore stood with her arms crossed, her dark hair falling in waves over one shoulder as she studied the chaotic splashes. of paint with the intensity of someone seeing profound meaning in apparent disorder. She was smaller than he'd expected from the photographs, but her presence filled the space around her with an electric energy that made other museum-goers dressed in a flowing black dress that somehow managed to look both expensive and rebellious. She embodied everything the Whitmore family pretended to be, but wasn't authentic, uncompromising, real. Souta approached slowly, timing his movement to appear natural. He'd spent an hour observing her patterns, noting how she lingered longest before the most emotionally raw pieces, how she avoided the classical collections that her family would approve of, how she seemed to absorb each painting like she was drinking in liquid rebellion. "Pollock always makes me think of controlled chaos," he said softly, stopping just close enough to be heard but far enough to avoid seeming intrusive. "Like someone found a way to make destruction beautiful." Charlotte's head turned slightly, revealing sharp green eyes that seemed to dissect him in an instant. Up close, the family resemblance to Emma was unmistakable, but where Emma's features held soft compliance, Charlotte's face was all angles and defiance. "Most people see mess," she replied, her voice carrying a slight rasp that suggested too many late nights and too much wine. "They want art to be pretty, digestible, something that matches their sofa. That's why it's powerful," Souta said, moving to stand beside her, both of them now facing the painting. "It refuses to be comfortable. It demands you feel something, even if that something is uncomfortable." A ghost of a smile touched Charlotte's lips. "You don't sound like the usual museum crowd. They prefer their rebellion safely contained in history books." "I'm not really the museum type," Souta admitted, allowing a hint of his genuine self to color his words. "But sometimes you need to see how other people have channeled their anger into something productive." Charlotte turned to face him. Fully now, her assessment more thorough. "Anger. That's an interesting word choice for discussing art. Isn't all the best art born from some kind of pain?" Souta met her gaze steadily. "The need to transform something destructive into something meaningful?" For a moment they stood in silence, the weight of unspoken understanding settling between them. Charlotte's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she were trying to solve a puzzle. "Do I know you?" she asked finally. "You seem familiar." Souta's pulse quickened, but his expression remained calm. "Souta Kurogane. I used to." He paused, as if the words were difficult. "I used to know your family. Your cousin Emma and I were close." Recognition flashed across Charlotte's features, followed immediately by something that looked like sympathy tinged with disgust. "Ah, you're the one they—" She stopped herself, shaking her head. "I'm sorry. That was a shitty thing they did." The genuine compassion in her voice caught him off guard. He'd expected curiosity, perhaps even hostility, but not this immediate understanding of his pain. "You heard about it?" he asked. Hard not to, when Emma spent weeks moping around. Like she was the victim. Charlotte's tone turned bitter. "My family has a talent for making themselves the injured party in every situation they create." Souta felt the first stirring of real connection beneath his calculated approach. "You weren't at the engagement announcement. I was in Paris. Convenient timing." Charlotte's smile was sharp. "I have a policy of avoiding family gatherings whenever possible. Saves everyone the discomfort of pretending we tolerate each other." They walked slowly toward the next exhibit, their conversation flowing with surprising ease. Souta found himself genuinely curious about this woman who seemed to see through her family's facade as clearly as he did. "Why stay away?" he asked. "You could fight them from the inside." Charlotte laughed, a sound with no humor in it.
Oh.
"Still believe in fighting them? After what they did to you?" She shook her head. "The Whitmores don't fight fair, Souta. They don't fight at all. They simply eliminate obstacles." "You learned that the hard way," maybe Souta said carefully. "But elimination works both ways." Charlotte stopped walking, turning to study. His face with new intensity. "That's a dangerous way of thinking, is it?" Souta met her gaze. "Or is it just practical? They use their power to destroy something important to me. Why shouldn't I use mine to return the favor?" "Because you'll become exactly what they are," Charlotte said. But there was something in her voice, not condemnation, but curiosity. "That's what happened to my mother. She married into this family thinking she could change it from within. Instead, it changed her." "Your mother is Victoria's sister-in-law," Souta said, remembering his research. "The one who died in the car? A CCIDNT when you were 15. Pain flickered across Charlotte's features. She wasn't always weak. Before she married my father, she was an artist. A real one, not just someone who collected pretty things. But the family. It grinds down anything genuine until only the acceptable parts remain." "I'm sorry," Souta said, and meant it. "But maybe that's exactly why they need to face consequences. People like your mother, like me, we're not the first people they've destroyed, and we won't be the last unless someone stops them." Charlotte was quiet for a long moment, studying a sculpture of intertwined figures that seemed to be either embracing or strangling each other. "What kind of consequences did you have in mind?" she asked finally. This was the moment. Souta felt the weight of his entire plan balanced on his next words. "The kind that uses their own weapons against them," he said. "Their obsession with reputation, their need to control the narrative. What if someone appeared who could threaten both? Someone like you? Someone like us?" Charlotte's eyebrows rose. Souta took a careful breath. "You hate them as much as I do, for your own reasons. You're the family rebel, the one they can't control or predict. And you're a Whitmore, which means your choices reflect on them whether they like it or not." Understanding dawned in Charlotte's eyes, followed by something that looked dangerously like excitement. "You want to use me to embarrass them?" "I want to offer you a chance to embarrass them while protecting yourself," Souta corrected. "Your Aunt Victoria has been arranging matches for every eligible family member. How long before she turns her attention to you?" Charlotte's face darkened. "She's already started. There's a banker's son she keeps insisting I meet. Apparently my bohemian phase has gone on long enough." "And what if you were already engaged? To someone completely unacceptable by their standards?" The silence stretched between them, charged with possibility. Charlotte's mind was clearly racing, weighing options and consequences. "A fake engagement," she said slowly. "Mutually beneficial," Souta confirmed. "You get protection from unwanted suitors and the satisfaction of watching your family squirm. I get closure. And what happens when they try to destroy you again? Because they will. Let them try. I'm not the same man I was 6 months ago." Souta's voice carried a hardness that made Charlotte's eyes widen slightly. "Besides, it's harder to eliminate someone who's already inside the family." Charlotte laughed, a genuine sound this time, full of wicked delight. "You want to marry into the family that rejected you? That's either brilliant or completely insane." "Maybe," both Souta admitted. "The question is, are you interested in being complicit in my insanity?" Charlotte studied him for another long moment, then extended her hand with a smile that was all sharp edges and dangerous promise. "Charlotte Whitmore," she said. "And yes, I think I'd like to watch the world burn with you." As Souta shook her hand, he felt the first piece of his elaborate revenge fall into place. But beneath the satisfaction was something unexpected, a genuine spark of connection with this fierce, damaged woman who understood betrayal as intimately as he did. "When do we start?" Charlotte asked. Souta's smile was answer enough. Game was beginning, and this time he intended to win. The grand ballroom of the Four Seasons gleamed like a stage set for royalty, its crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across Boston's elite as they gathered for the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala. Souta adjusted his bow tie one final time, feeling the weight of the moment settle around him like armor. 3 weeks had passed since his alliance with Charlotte. 3 weeks of careful planning and rehearsed intimacy that had led to their debut as New England society's most scandalous couple. Ready to cause some chaos, Charlotte whispered beside him, her arm linked through his as they paused at the ballroom's entrance. She looked devastating in midnight blue silk that complemented her pale skin and dark hair, every inch the Whitmore princess, even as she prepared to detonate their carefully constructed world. Always, Souta replied, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. The familiar surge of anticipation coursed through his veins, the same feeling he'd once associated with closing a difficult case, now redirected toward a far more personal victory. They entered together, and Souta felt the exact moment the room's energy shifted. Conversations faltered mid-sentence, champagne glasses paused halfway to lips, heads turned with the synchronized precision of a choreographed dance. The whispers began immediately, a susurrus of shock and speculation that followed their progress across the marble floor. "Is that Charlotte Whitmore with? Didn't he used to date Emma?" Absolutely scandalous. Souta's gaze swept the room, cataloging reactions with predatory satisfaction. But his focus sharpened when he spotted the Whitmore family clustered near the auction displays. Their faces a tableau of horror that would have been comical if it weren't so perfectly orchestrated. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emma saw them first. She stood frozen beside Marcus Sterling, her champagne flute trembling in her manicured fingers as color drained from her face. For a moment, Souta felt an echo of the man he'd once been, the one who would have rushed to comfort her obvious distress. That impulse died quickly, replaced by cold satisfaction at her shock. "Oh, this is delicious," Charlotte murmured, following his gaze. "Emma looks like she's seen a ghost." Which, I suppose, she has. Victoria Whitmore's recovery was swifter, her social conditioning kicking in as she glided toward them with a smile that could have frozen champagne. Richard followed in her wake, his jovial mask slipping just enough to reveal the panic beneath. "Charlotte, darling," Victoria's voice carried across the space between them, pitched to sound delighted rather than murderous. "What a lovely surprise. We weren't expecting you tonight." "Aunt Victoria," Charlotte replied with equal sweetness, her grip on Souta's arm tightening almost imperceptibly. "I wouldn't miss it, especially since I have such wonderful news to share." The crowd around them had grown, drawn by the promise of drama that money could never quite buy. Souta recognized several faces from his previous life in Emma's orbit board members. Socialites, business partners who'd once looked through him like he was invisible. Tonight, their attention was absolute. News. Victoria's voice remained steady, but Souta caught the flash of something feral in her eyes. Charlotte's smile was radiant, and when she looked up at Souta, he was startled by how genuine her affection appeared. They'd practiced this moment, but her performance exceeded his expectations. "Souta and I are engaged," Charlotte announced, her voice carrying clearly across the hushed ballroom. "Can you believe it? I finally found someone who sees past all the family nonsense to who I really am." The silence that followed was deafening. Somewhere in the distance, Souta heard the clink of a dropped glass, probably Emma's. Victoria's smile never wavered, but her knuckles went white where they gripped her clutch. "How unexpected," Victoria managed. "And so sudden. When did this happen?" "When you know, Souta said, speaking for the first time since entering the ballroom. His voice carried just enough warmth to sound believable, while maintaining an edge that made it clear he wasn't the same man they'd dismissed. "Charlotte is extraordinary. I should have seen it years ago." The implication hung in the air, like smoke. "If I hadn't been distracted by your daughter's deception." Emma made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Marcus Sterling's hand shot out to steady her, his face darkening with something that looked suspiciously like jealousy. Interesting. Apparently, even arranged fiancés could feel possessive about their territory. "Emma, are you all right?" "All right." asked with false concern. "You look a bit pale. Perhaps some air?" "I'm fine," Emma whispered, but her voice cracked on the words. Souta, could we speak privately? Please?" The desperation in her voice was palpable, and Souta felt a moment of something that might have been pity. Almost. But then he remembered the ring box in his pocket that night. 6 months ago, the carefully rehearsed words of love he'd never gotten to speak, the future that had crumbled before he'd even known it was threatened. "I don't think that's appropriate," he said gently, his tone suggesting regret while his eyes remained cold. "I'm here with my fiancé." "Your fiancé?" Marcus Sterling spoke for the first time, his voice dripping with disdain. "How touching. Tell me, Kurogane, does Charlotte know about your family's financial difficulties? Your father's bankruptcy? The loans you had to take just to afford law school?" The attack was clumsy, predictable, but it served its purpose. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, remembering their own prejudices about class and breeding. Souta felt Charlotte stiffen beside him, not from shock, but from anger. "Actually," Charlotte said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "I find it refreshing to be with someone who earned everything he has, unlike some people, who inherited their worth along with their trust funds." Marcus's face flushed red. "At least I didn't have to scrape and crawl enough," Victoria hissed, her composure finally cracking. "This is neither the time nor the place for such discussions." "You're absolutely right," Souta agreed smoothly. "This is a celebration. We should be talking about the future, not dwelling on the past." He guided Charlotte toward the dance floor, aware of every eye following their movement. As they swayed to the orchestra's gentle waltz, caught fragments of conversations buzzing around them, speculation about their timeline, their compatibility, the scandal of it all. "Emma's staring holes in your back," Charlotte murmured against his ear, her breath warm against his skin. "She looks like she wants to murder me." Good Souta replied, but he was surprised to find that the satisfaction felt hollow. Emma's pain should have been sweet revenge, but instead it just felt empty. "Let her stare. And Marcus looks like he's planning your demise. Apparently he's not as indifferent to Emma as he pretends." Souta's attention sharpened. That was unexpected and potentially useful, jealous, furious. "I think he thought he had the only claim on a Whitmore bride. Your presence threatens his sense of superiority." As they danced, Souta became increasingly aware of Charlotte herself, the way she moved with unconscious grace, how her hand felt. Perfectly natural in his, the genuine warmth in her eyes when she looked at him. This was supposed to be performance, calculated intimacy designed to sell their story. But something about it felt dangerously real. "Thank you," he said quietly, meaning it more than he'd expected. "For what? For this? For seeing what they really are? For choosing to fight back?" Charlotte's smile softened, losing its sharp edges. "Don't thank me yet. You haven't even gotten to the good part." As if summoned by her words, James Whitmore appeared at the edge of the dance floor, his young face bright with something that looked like genuine happiness. Unlike the rest of his family, his smile seemed real. "May I cut in?" he asked politely. "I'd like to congratulate my cousin properly." Charlotte stepped back with obvious affection. "Jamie, you look handsome in your tux. Very grown up." As James took Charlotte's hand, Souta found himself facing the one Whitmore who'd always treated him with basic human decency. The kid, though. At 22, James was hardly a kid anymore, had always been different from his family. "I'm happy for you both," James said quietly, his voice sincere. "Charlotte deserves someone who appreciates her, and you, well, you deserve to be happy after what happened." The simple kindness in his words hit Souta unexpectedly hard. This was what he'd thought he was getting when he'd fallen in love with Em: acceptance, warmth, a place in a family that valued him. He'd found it, just not where he'd expected. Watching Charlotte laugh at something, James whispered. Seeing the genuine affection between the cousins, Souta felt the first crack in his carefully constructed armor. This was supposed to be about revenge, about evening the score. But looking at Charlotte's radiant face, he wondered if he was in danger of forgetting the difference between performance and reality. The thought should have alarmed him. Instead, as Charlotte's eyes met his across the dance floor, It thrilled him in ways his original plan never had. The game was more complex than he'd anticipated. And despite himself, he was beginning to enjoy it for reasons that had nothing to do with revenge. 2 weeks after the gala, Souta found himself in the paradoxical position of living a lie that felt more honest than any truth he'd known in months. He stood in Charlotte's Beacon Hill apartment, watching her prepare dinner with the unself-conscious grace of someone comfortable in her own skin, a stark contrast to the performed perfection he'd grown accustomed to in the Whitmore world. "James is coming by around 7, Charlotte called from the kitchen, her voice carrying over the soft jazz playing from hidden speakers. "Fair warning, he's going to interrogate you about your intentions. He takes his role as my protector very seriously. Should I be worried?" Souta asked, though he found himself genuinely looking forward to the evening. James had been the one bright spot in his previous relationship with the family, and their brief interaction at the gala had reminded him why. "Only if you're secretly a serial killer or a Republican," Charlotte replied with a laugh that made something warm unfurl in his chest. "He's surprisingly good at reading people for someone so young." The apartment itself was a study in contradictions. Expensive. Bones inherited from family money, but filled with Charlotte's own touches that spoke of rebellion and authenticity. Abstract paintings covered walls that should have held portraits of dead relatives, and vintage furniture mixed with pieces she'd clearly chosen for comfort rather than status. Souta had been spending more time here than his own place, ostensibly to maintain their cover, but increasingly because he simply wanted to. The realization should have disturbed him. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing he'd done since that night 6 months ago. His phone buzzed with a text from Helen. "Saw the society pages. You two look convincing. Maybe too convincing." Before he could respond, Charlotte appeared with a glass of wine, having somehow read his expression. "Helen again?" she asked, settling beside him on the couch with practiced intimacy. Over the past weeks, they'd developed a comfortable, physical, language casual touches, shared looks, the kind of unconscious closeness that sold their story to observers. "She's worried I'm losing myself in this," Souta admitted. "Accepting the wine. She thinks revenge is corrupting my soul," or some equally dramatic assessment. "Is it?" Charlotte's question was casual, but her green eyes were sharp with genuine curiosity. Souta considered the question more seriously than he'd expected. "2, I don't know anymore. When I started this, everything was clear-cut. Your family destroyed something important to me, and I wanted to return the favor. But now it's complicated," Charlotte finished, "because revenge is supposed to feel good, and this feels like something else entirely." At their eyes met, and Souta felt that dangerous pull again, the sense that this woman saw him more clearly than anyone ever had, including Emma. It was terrifying and addictive in equal measure. The moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Charlotte rose to answer it, and Souta heard James's voice, warm with genuine affection. "Charlie, you look happy." It's like genuinely happy, not that fake smile you use at family functions. "Because I am happy, you insufferable child," Charlotte replied, but her tone was fond. "Come meet your future cousin-in-law properly." James entered the living room with the easy confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world, yet somehow managed to wear his privilege lightly. At 22, he had the kind of earnest intelligence that reminded Souta of his younger self before cynicism had carved away the softer edges. Souta James extended his hand with a genuine smile. "I'm glad we get to do this properly. The gala was intense." "It's one word for it," Souta replied, shaking his hand. "Your family certainly knows how to create an atmosphere." "My family excels at many things," James said diplomatically. "Subtlety isn't one of them." "I hope they didn't make things too uncomfortable for you both." Charlotte snorted. "Uncomfortable? Your mother looked like she was planning our funerals. While we danced, Aunt Victoria has strong opinions about family reputation," James said carefully, "but she adapted. She always does when presented with a fait accompli." Over dinner, Souta found himself relaxing in ways he hadn't expected. James asked thoughtful questions about his legal work, his background, his plans, but not in the invasive way Victoria had during his relationship with Emma. Instead, James seemed genuinely interested in understanding who Souta was as a person. "Charlotte mentioned you specialize in corporate law. James said over the pasta Charlotte had prepared with surprising skill. That must have been helpful during the Sterling Industries merger. A lot of regulatory complexity there. Souta's fork paused halfway to his mouth. How do you know about Sterling Industries? James's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. Marcus mentioned it. He was frustrated by some of the legal challenges. Marcus was frustrated by a lot of things lately, Charlotte observed, including the fact that his supposedly compliant fiancée has developed a backbone. Emma's been different since the gala, James admitted. More assertive. She started questioning things she never questioned before. Something cold settled in Souta's stomach. What kind of things? The engagement timeline, for one. Whether she really wants to marry Marcus at all. James looked uncomfortable discussing family business, but continued. She keeps asking about you. What you're like now, whether you seem happy with Charlotte. She had her chance, Charlotte said sharply. She chose family approval over love. That's on her. Is it, though? James asked quietly. When you've been raised from birth to believe that family duty comes before personal happiness? When your entire identity is built around meeting other people's expectations? The question hung in the air, challenging and uncomfortable. Souta found himself thinking about Emma not as the villain of his story, but as another victim of the same system that had rejected him. That doesn't excuse the deception, he said finally. She led me on for 3 years. No, James agreed. It doesn't excuse it, but it might explain it. After dinner, James helped clear dishes while Charlotte prepared coffee, leaving Souta alone with his thoughts. Through the kitchen doorway, he could hear the cousins talking in low voices, James asking pointed questions about Charlotte's feelings, Charlotte deflecting with practiced humor. When they returned, James's expression had shifted to something more serious. I need to tell you both something, he said, settling back into his chair. Mother and Aunt Victoria have hired a private investigator. They're looking into both your backgrounds, trying to find something they can use to break you up. Charlotte's laugh was bitter. Of course they have. What exactly are they hoping to find? I'm not sure about you, Charlie, but for Souta. James looked uncomfortable. They're focusing on his finances, his family situation, anything that might suggest he's using you for money or social advancement. Will they find anything? Charlotte asked, looking at Souta with raised eyebrows. Souta felt the weight of his deception settling around him like chains. His financial situation had indeed improved dramatically since the breakup, not through any illegal means, but through the kind of ruthless business practices that would have horrified his former self. He'd leveraged connections made during his time with Emma, used information gleaned from family conversations, played the game by their rules instead of his own ethical standards. I'll find what they're looking for, he said quietly. Evidence that I've changed, become more like them. The question is whether that matters to you. Charlotte studied his face for a long moment. Everyone changes, Souta. The question is whether you've changed into someone you can live with. Before he could answer, his phone rang. Helen's name flashed on the screen, and something in her timing made him answer, despite the late hour. Souta, Helen's voice was tight with concern. We need to talk. Tonight. There's something you need to know about the Whitmore investigation. What kind of something? The kind that could destroy everything you've built with Charlotte, Helen said. They found the Nakamura contract. Souta's blood turned to ice. The Nakamura contract, the business deal he'd negotiated using information he'd overheard at a Whitmore family dinner. The one that had funded his new apartment and expensive suits and his ability to move in Charlotte's social circles. It wasn't illegal, but it was exactly the kind of opportunistic behavior that would prove Victoria's point about his character. I'll be right there, he said, ending the call with hands that weren't quite steady. Charlotte was watching him with sharp eyes. Bad news? The worst kind, Souta replied. The kind that's true. As he prepared to leave, Charlotte caught his arm. Whatever it is, we'll handle it. That's what partners do. The word partners hit him like a physical blow. Partners, not co-conspirators. Not fellow actors in an elaborate performance. But partners? When had this stopped being about revenge and started being about something real? Charlotte, he began, but she pressed a finger to his lips. Don't, she said softly. Don't say anything you might regret. Handle whatever crisis this is, and then we'll talk. Really talk. As Souta left the warmth of Charlotte's apartment for the cold Boston night, he realized that Helen had been right to worry. He was losing himself in this, but not in the way she'd feared. He wasn't becoming corrupted by revenge. He was becoming vulnerable to something far more dangerous. The possibility of genuine love with a woman who deserved better than the deception that had brought them together. The irony wasn't lost on him. In trying to use Charlotte to hurt the Whitmores, he'd opened himself up to the very real possibility of losing her and discovering that would hurt more than anything Emma's family had ever done to him. Helen's apartment felt like a war room. At midnight, documents spread across her coffee table like evidence of a crime Souta wasn't sure he could deny. The Nakamura contract lay at the center of it, all innocent-looking pages that contained the seeds of potential destruction. They have everything, Helen said, without preamble, her usually warm brown eyes cold with disappointment. The timeline, the information source, even the family dinner where you overheard the merger details. Victoria Whitmore's investigator is thorough, I'll give him that. Souta sank into Helen's worn leather chair, the same one where he'd nursed his heartbreak 6 months ago. How bad is it? Bad enough. Helen picked up the top document, scanning it with her lawyer's eye for detail. Technically, you didn't break any laws, but ethically, you used privileged information gained through personal relationships to make a profit. It's exactly the kind of opportunistic behavior that proves every prejudice they ever had about you. The words hit like physical blows. I never claimed to be a saint, Helen. No, but you used to have principles. Helen's voice carried the weight of years of friendship and growing concern. The Souta I knew in law school would never have done this. He would have found another way. The Souta you knew in law school was naive. Souta shot back, anger. Flaring, he believed that working hard and playing fair would be enough. Look where that got him. Got him Charlotte, Helen said quietly. Or have you forgotten that this entire scheme was supposed to be about revenge? The reminder stung because it was true. Somewhere between planning his return and living his lie, the lines had blurred beyond recognition. Charlotte wasn't just his accomplice anymore. She was the person whose opinion mattered most, whose trust he'd earned under false pretenses. She deserves to know the truth, Helen continued. About the contract, about how you've changed, about what this has cost. You. She'll leave, Souta said, the words coming out more raw than he'd intended. The moment she realizes what I've become, she'll walk away. And maybe that's what should happen. Helen's voice was gentle but uncompromising. You can't build something real on a foundation of lies, no matter how good your intentions. Before Souta could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from Charlotte. Everything okay? You looked shaken when you left. The simple concern in her message made his chest tighten. How had he let himself get so deep into this deception? And how could he face losing the first genuine connection he'd felt since Emma's betrayal? He was still staring at his phone when it rang. Emma's name on the screen sent ice through his veins. Don't answer it, Helen warned, but Souta was already swiping to accept. Emma Souta, thank God. Emma's voice was breathless, desperate. I need to see you tonight, please. That's not appropriate. Marcus knows about us, Emma interrupted. About what we had. About the ring you bought. About everything. He's furious. And he's planning something terrible for you and Charlotte. You have to listen to me. Line went dead, leaving Souta staring at his phone in confusion and growing dread. She hung up, he told Helen, who was watching him with obvious concern. Emma Whitmore doesn't call ex-boyfriends at midnight unless the world is ending, Helen observed. What did she say? Before Souta could answer, his phone buzzed again, not a call this time, but a location pin from Emma. She was at Boston Common, of all places, at nearly 1 a.m. I have to go, Souta said, already reaching for his jacket. This is exactly what Victoria wants, Helen protested. To separate you from Charlotte, to make you look guilty of something. Don't take the bait. But Souta was already heading for the door, driven by an instinct he couldn't quite name. Emma had sounded genuinely terrified, and despite everything she'd done to him, he couldn't ignore that. 20 minutes later, he found her sitting on a bench near the public garden, wrapped in an expensive coat that couldn't quite hide her shivering. In the lamplight, she looked younger than her 26 years. Fragile in a way that reminded him why he'd fallen for her in the first place. "Thank you for coming," she said as he approached, not standing to greet him. "I wasn't sure you would." "What's this about, Emma?" Souta kept his distance, hyper-aware of how this would look to anyone watching. "And why here?" "Because it's the only place I could think of where Marcus wouldn't follow me," Emma said, her voice small. "He's been having me watched since your engagement announcement. Says he needs to protect his investment." The casual cruelty of the phrase made Souta's jaw clench. "His investment? It's what I am to him. What I've always been," Emma finally looked up at him, and he was shocked to see tears in her eyes. "I tried to convince myself it was different, that he cared about me as more than just a merger opportunity. But tonight," she trailed off, pulling her coat tighter around herself. In the distance, Boston's skyline glittered like a constellation of broken promises. "Tonight what?" Souta prompted, despite every instinct telling him to walk away. "He showed me the file his investigator compiled on you. On Charlotte. He was so proud of what he'd found, so certain it would destroy your relationship." Emma's voice broke. "But when I saw what you'd become, the contracts, the business deals, it's the way you've hardened yourself, realized it was my fault." "Your fault? I broke you," Emma whispered. "The man I loved would never have done those things. You changed because of what I did to you. And now Marcus is going to use that change to hurt you again." Souta felt something crack inside his chest. It's not just at Emma's words, but at the recognition that she was right. The Nakamura contract, the calculated manipulation of his newfound connections. The way he'd weaponized his own pain, none of it was who he'd been before that night 6 months ago. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because I finally realized I love you," Emma said, the words dropping between them like stones into still water. "At the idea of you, not the comfort of our relationship, but you. And I'm too late. And it's my own fault, and I can't bear watching Marcus destroy whatever happiness you found with Charlotte." The confession should have felt like vindication, the closure he'd thought he wanted. Instead, it just felt sad, a reminder of how much damage their family's machinations had caused. "Emma, I know you don't love me anymore," she continued quickly. "I can see it when you look at Charlotte. You never looked at me like that, not even when we were happy. But I need you to know that if I could go back, if I could choose differently—" "But you can't," Souta said gently. "Neither of us can." Emma nodded, wiping tears from her cheeks. "Marcus is planning to release the investigator's findings tomorrow, at the Children's Hospital Board meeting, where Charlotte will be present. He wants to humiliate her publicly, make her choose between her reputation and you. The calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. Why tell me? Your family will never forgive you for warning me." "My family?" Emma laughed bitterly. "You mean the people who sold me to the highest bidder and convinced me it was love? I'm done caring what they think." As if summoned by her words, car headlights swept across the park. Emma's face went white as she recognized the vehicle. "Marcus," she breathed. "He must have tracked my phone." The car pulled up to the curb, and Marcus Sterling emerged with the purposeful stride of a man accustomed to getting his way. Even at this hour, he was perfectly dressed, his anger contained beneath a veneer of cold control. "Emma," he called, his voice carrying across the distance. "How lovely to find you here, with him." Emma stood, her brief moment of courage crumbling under Marcus's approach. "Marcus, I can explain." "No need," Marcus said smoothly, his smile sharp enough to cut. "I think the situation is quite clear. Fiancé meeting secretly with her ex-lover in the middle of the night. Very clear indeed." He pulled out his phone, and the camera flash illuminated the park like lightning. "I think the board will find this photograph quite illuminating when I present my findings tomorrow." Souta realized with sinking certainty that he'd walked directly into a trap. Marcus hadn't tracked him, he'd orchestrated this entire meeting, using Emma's genuine feelings as bait to create exactly this compromising situation. "You bastard," Souta said, but Marcus only smiled wider. "Just business," Marcus replied. Emma learned her lines beautifully, don't you think? "Oh, I suspect." Some of those tears were real. She always was too sentimental for her own good. As Marcus guided a devastated Emma back to his car, Souta stood alone in the park, realizing that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse around him. And somewhere across the city, Charlotte was probably wondering why he hadn't come home, trusting him with a faith he'd never deserved and was about to lose forever. Souta didn't return to his apartment that night. Instead, he walked the empty streets of Boston until dawn, his mind churning through possibilities and escape. Routes that all led to the same inevitable conclusion. By tomorrow evening, his carefully constructed world would be in ruins. The photograph Marcus had taken would serve as the final nail in a coffin, already built from the Nakamura contract and Souta's own moral compromises. When he finally returned to Charlotte's apartment at 7 in the morning, he found her sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee and James beside her, both of them wearing expressions that told him his night of reckoning had arrived even sooner than expected. "The hospital board meeting is at 3, Charlotte said without preamble, her voice carefully neutral. "James thought I should know what Marcus is planning to present." Ada's stomach dropped. "How much do you know?" "All of it," James said. Quietly, the investigator's report, the Nakamura contract, even the photograph from last night. Marcus couldn't resist bragging to Emma about his masterful strategy. Charlotte's green eyes were unreadable as she studied Souta's face. "Is it true? The contract, the way you used information from our family dinners to make money?" Was no point in denial. The evidence was overwhelming, and more importantly, Charlotte deserved the truth he should have given her weeks ago. "Yes," Souta said simply. "All of it. And last night, meeting Emma in secret? She called, said Marcus was planning something terrible. I thought she was warning me." Souta's laugh was bitter. Turns out she was just excellent bait. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment, her fingers wrapped around her coffee mug like an anchor. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but distant. "You used me," she said. "It's not just for revenge against my family, but to get close enough to their business dealings to profit from them. That's what this has been about from the beginning, hasn't it?" "No," Souta said quickly, then stopped himself. "Not entirely. It started that way, but Charlotte, but what?" Her voice cracked slightly. "But you grew to care about me? How convenient that your feelings evolved right around the time you realized I might be useful for more than just embarrassing my aunt." "Family, that's not," Souta began, but James's voice cut through his protest. "There's more," James said reluctantly. "About the night you were kicked out, about what really happened?" Souta went cold. "About it. Emma never wanted the engagement to Marcus," James continued. "Mother and Aunt Victoria arranged it without consulting her. She was going to tell you that night, ask you to help her break free from the family's plans. But when she saw how hurt you were by the announcement, she convinced herself you were better off without her and her family's dysfunction."
Ow.
The revelation hit Souta like a physical blow. Emma had been as trapped as he was, just in a different kind of cage. The woman he'd spent 6 months hating had been another victim of the same system that had crushed his dreams. "Why are you telling me this?" Souta asked. "Because Emma's finally ready to fight back," James said, "or is going to refuse the engagement. At today's board meeting, publicly, she asked me to tell you that she's sorry for the deception, for her cowardice, for everything. She said she understands if you can't forgive her, but she wanted you to know the truth." Charlotte's laugh was sharp and humorless. How touching. The star-crossed lovers reunited by mutual victimhood. "I'm sure that's very satisfying for your narrative, Souta." "Charlotte, please, please." "What?" She stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the Charles River. "Please pretend that I didn't just discover our entire relationship is built on lies. Please act like I'm not the biggest fool in Boston for believing that someone like you could actually care about someone like me. Someone like you." Souta's own anger flared. "What's that supposed to mean?" "The family. Rebel. The damaged goods. The convenient tool for your revenge fantasy." Charlotte's voice was rising, months of suppressed pain finally breaking through. "Did you think I didn't know what I was? I've been the Whitmore family disappointment my entire life. The one they trot out when they need to appear progressive, then hide away when important people are watching. That's not how I see you, isn't it?" Charlotte whirled to face him. "Then explain the Nakamura contract. Explain how you used our conversations about family business to line your own pockets." Explain how every intimate moment between us was just you getting closer to your real targets. Souta felt the weight of his choices crushing down on him. Every justification he'd constructed over the past months crumbled in the face of Charlotte's pain. "You're right," he said quietly, "about all of it. I used you. I lied to you. I became exactly the kind of person I once despised. But Charlotte, what I feel for you, that's real. That's the only real thing left in this mess. How convenient that you discovered real feelings right when your revenge plot started falling apart." Charlotte's smile was cutting. "Tell me, Souta, if Marcus hadn't outmaneuvered you, if your secrets hadn't been exposed, would you ever have told me the truth?" The question hung in the air between them, and Souta's silence was answer enough. "I thought so," Charlotte said softly. "James, would you give us a moment?" James looked between them with obvious concern, but nodded, squeezing Charlotte's shoulder as he passed. "I'll be in the living room if you need me." Once they were alone, Charlotte's mask of composed anger slipped, revealing the hurt beneath. "I fell in love with you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Despite knowing this started as a lie, despite every instinct telling me to protect myself, I fell in love with the man I thought you were. The one who understood what it felt like to be rejected by my family, who saw past their bullshit to something real. I am that man." "No, you're not." Charlotte shook her head. "That man wouldn't have used privileged information to make money. That man wouldn't have orchestrated an elaborate deception to get close to his ex-girlfriend's family. That man had principles. Those principles didn't protect me from your family's cruelty," Souta shot back. "They didn't stop your aunt from destroying my relationship, or your father from looking through me like I was invisible. Maybe the man you fell in love with was too weak to survive in your world. Maybe he was too good for it," Charlotte replied. "And maybe that's what I loved about him." As the past tense hit Souta harder than any accusation. "So that's it? You're walking away?" "I'm saving myself," Charlotte corrected. "From a relationship built on deception. From a man who's lost himself so completely in revenge that he can't see what he's become. From the humiliation of standing beside you when Marcus presents his evidence this afternoon. You don't have to face that alone," Souta said desperately. "If we could leave, go somewhere, and prove every terrible thing my family believes about people like you." Charlotte's voice was sharp. "You're a fortune hunter who seduced the damaged cousin. For money and status? No, thank you." She moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I think the man you used to be would have made this right somehow. He would have found a way to protect the people he cared about without destroying himself in the process." "Charlotte, the engagement is off," she said, without turning around. "Whatever happens at that board meeting, whatever Marcus reveals, I won't be standing there as your fiancé to legitimize it. You're on your own." The door closed behind her with quiet finality, leaving Souta alone in the apartment that had briefly felt like home. Outside, Boston was waking up to another beautiful autumn day, indifferent to the fact that his world had just collapsed for the second time in 6 months. But this time, he had no one to blame but himself. His phone buzzed with a text from Helen. "Board meeting's been moved to 2 p.m. Marcus wants maximum attendance for the show. Whatever you're going to do, decide fast." Souta stared at the message, then at the apartment around him, Charlotte's paintings. Her books, the evidence of a life she'd been willing to share with him, before he'd proven himself unworthy of the gift. He thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago, the one Charlotte had fallen in love with despite never meeting him. That man would have found a way to make this right, to protect the people he cared about, even at cost to himself. Maybe it was time to remember who that man had been. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to become him again. The Children's Hospital boardroom buzzed with anticipation as Boston's elite settled into their seats. Sensing that today's meeting would be anything but routine, Souta stood in the hallway outside, its reflection in the polished marble walls, showing a man who looked like he was preparing for his own execution. In many ways he was. He'd spent the morning making phone calls, gathering documents, and preparing for what might be the most important presentation of his legal career, not to win a case, but to ensure that when Marcus Sterling destroyed him, at least some truth would emerge from the wreckage. "You don't have to do this," Helen said quietly. Beside him, she'd insisted on coming. despite his protests that there was no point in both of them going down with this ship. "There are other ways to handle this. Quieter ways," Souta replied, adjusting his tie one final time. "I've spent months hiding behind lies and manipulation. If I'm going down honestly." Through the glass doors, he could see the board members taking their seats, Victoria Whitmore holding court at one end of the table, her smile sharp with anticipated victory. Richard sat beside her, looking uncomfortable in the way of men who knew they were complicit in something distasteful, but lacked the courage to stop it. Marcus stood near the presentation screen, his laptop already connected, a predator savoring the moment before the kill, but it was the empty chair where Charlotte should have been sitting that hit Souta hardest. She'd kept her word she wouldn't be here to witness his downfall or legitimize it with her presence. The absence felt like a physical wound. Emma sat across from her parents, her posture rigid with barely contained anxiety. James had positioned himself beside her, his young face set with determination. Whatever Emma planned to do, her brother was prepared to support her. "Showtime," Souta murmured, pushing through the doors. The conversation stopped as he entered, all eyes turning to him with varying degrees of curiosity, hostility, and anticipation. Victoria's smile widened as she took in his appearance, composed on the surface, but clearly a man walking toward his doom. "Mr. Kurogane," she said with false warmth, "how lovely that you could join us, though I must say I'm surprised to see you here without Charlotte. Trouble in paradise?" "Charlotte is exactly where she should be," Souta replied evenly, taking a seat near the back of the room, making her own choices based on complete information. Marcus cleared his throat, drawing attention to himself. "If we could begin? I have some rather urgent matters to bring before the board regarding the integrity of certain relationships within our social circle." "By all means," said Dr. Patricia Williams, the hospital's chief administrator and board chair. "Though I'm not sure why personal relationships warrant board attention." "Because those relationships affect the reputation and donor confidence of this institution," Marcus replied smoothly. "As you'll see from my presentation, we have a serious problem involving deception, financial impropriety, and the manipulation of family connections for personal gain." The first slide appeared on the screen, a professional headshot of Souta alongside financial documents. Marcus launched into his presentation with the polished confidence of a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. 6 months ago, Souta Kurogane's relationship with the Whitmore family ended under unfortunate circumstances, rather than accept this outcome gracefully. Mr. Kurogane embarked on an elaborate scheme of revenge that has compromised the integrity of one of Boston's most respected families. More slides appeared: the Nakamura contract, financial records, a timeline connecting Souta's business deals to family social events. Marcus's narrative was compelling, painting Souta as a calculating opportunist who'd used his insider knowledge for profit. Furthermore, Marcus continued, Mr. Kurogane has manipulated Charlotte Whitmore's well-known family conflicts to orchestrate a fake engagement designed to humiliate the Whitmore name while positioning himself for further financial gain. Shh. Murmurs rippled through the room. Several board members looked shocked, others merely interested in the scandal. Victoria's expression was one of satisfied vindication. "And finally," Marcus said, his voice dropping to convey the gravity of his revelation, "as recently as last night, Mr. Kurogane was conducting secret meetings with his former lover, Emma Whitmore, demonstrating that his supposed engagement to Charlotte is nothing more than an elaborate deception." The photograph from Boston Common appeared on screen, Souta and Emma on the park bench, the image clearly suggesting intimacy and conspiracy. The room erupted in whispers. Dr. Williams called for order. "Mr. Sterling, while this is certainly illuminating, I'm still unclear why this concerns the hospital board. Because Mr. Kurogane has been using his connection to Charlotte to gain access to sensitive financial information about our donor families," Marcus replied. "Information that could be used to manipulate charitable giving or worse. We have a fiduciary responsibility to protect our donors from this kind of predatory behavior." It was masterfully done, Souta had to admit. Marcus had taken the truth and weaponized it, creating a narrative that painted Souta as a threat not just to the Whitmore family but to the entire philanthropic community. Mr. Kurogane, Dr. Williams said, "Would you like to respond to these allegations?" Souta stood slowly, aware that every eye in the room was upon him. This was his moment, not to save himself. That ship had sailed but to ensure that when the truth came out, it would be complete. "Everything Mr. Sterling has presented is factually accurate," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. "I did use information gained through personal relationships to make profitable business decisions. I did orchestrate a fake engagement with Charlotte Whitmore as part of a revenge scheme against her family. And yes, I did meet secretly with Emma Whitmore last night." Victoria's smile of triumph faltered slightly at his easy admission. This wasn't the desperate denial she'd expected. "However," Souta continued, "Mr. Sterling has omitted some crucial context that I think this Bourdain to this community deserves." To hear, he moved to the front of the room, his own laptop already prepared. "If we're going to discuss deception and manipulation, let's be thorough about it." The first slide that appeared showed a different set of financial documents. "These are the records from Sterling Industries' acquisition of Hartwell Manufacturing last year." Notice the timeline. The deal was finalized 3 days after Richard Whitmore's company secured a major city contract. Despite Hartwell being the more qualified bidder, confused murmurs filled the room. Richard's face had gone pale. "See?" Souta continued. "The Whitmore-Sterling partnership has been engaging in exactly the kind of financial manipulation Mr. Sterling accuses me of, but on a scale that makes my single contract look like petty theft." More slides appeared. Shell companies, bid rigging, strategic donations to city officials' campaigns timed perfectly with contract announcements. It was a web of corruption that spanned years and involved millions of dollars. "Mr. Kurogane," Victoria's voice was sharp, with barely controlled panic. "These baseless accusations are fully documented," Souta interrupted. "I've spent the last 6 months gathering evidence, initially for my own revenge, but ultimately because someone needed to expose the truth. The question is, why is Mr. Sterling so eager to discredit me now?" He clicked to the final slide, a document that made several board members gasp. It was a proposal for Sterling Industries to acquire controlling interest in the hospital's new research wing, with the Whitmore family as the primary financial backers. Because they're planning to use this hospital's reputation to legitimize their business practices, Souta said. They can't afford to have someone with knowledge of their methods asking uncomfortable questions. The room erupted in chaos. Board members demanded explanations. Victoria stood to object. And Marcus's composure finally cracked as he realized his own presentation had provided the perfect platform for Souta's counterattack. But it was Emma's voice that cut through the noise, clear and strong in a way Souta had never heard before. "It's true," she said, standing beside her brother. "All of it. I've been trapped in an engagement designed to facilitate illegal business practices, and my family has been using our charitable work to launder their reputation for years." "Emma," Victoria hissed. "Sit down this instant." "No," Emma replied, her voice steady, despite the trembling in her hands. "I'm done being your pawn. I'm ending my engagement to Marcus, effective immediately, and I'm prepared to testify about everything I've witnessed." James stood beside his sister, his young face set with determination. "I am too. The family I want to be part of is one that values truth over reputation." As security moved to escort the Whitmores from the building and board members called for emergency sessions and investigations, Souta felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Not satisfaction, not vindication, but simple relief. The truth was finally out. All of it, regardless of the cost to himself. He'd lost Charlotte, destroyed his own reputation, and likely ended his legal career in Boston. But he'd also remembered who he was supposed to be, not the calculating manipulator he'd become, but the man who believed that truth and justice mattered more than personal gain. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a beginning. 3 weeks after the board meeting that had sent shockwaves through Boston's elite circles, Souta sat in a coffee shop in Cambridge, reading the morning paper's latest update on what journalists had dubbed the Whitmore scandal. The headlines had been relentless. Federal investigations launched, city contracts under review, and the slow, methodical dismantling of a corruption network that had operated with impunity for years. Victoria. Whitmore faced multiple felony charges. Richard had agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for a plea deal. Marcus Sterling's business empire was collapsing as clients fled, and partners distanced themselves from the toxic association. The prestigious Whitmore name, built over generations, was now synonymous with fraud and manipulation. Souta should have felt vindicated. Instead, he felt empty. "Another coffee?" Helen asked, sliding into the seat across from him. She'd been checking on him daily since the fallout began, worried about his mental state as his world restructured itself around the truth he'd finally chosen to tell. "I'm fine," Souta said automatically, though they both knew it was a lie. His legal practice was effectively over. No client would trust a lawyer, who'd admitted to using privileged information for personal gain, regardless of his subsequent whistleblowing. His savings were nearly depleted, and his reputation, while cleared of criminal wrongdoing, was permanently tainted. "Have you heard from Charlotte?" Helen asked gently. Souta shook his head. He'd tried calling once 3 days after the board meeting, but she hadn't answered. The message he'd left an apology and explanation that felt inadequate. Even as he spoke, it had gone unreturned. According to James, who'd become an unexpected ally in the aftermath. Charlotte had taken an extended leave from her gallery work and was staying at a friend's place outside the city. "She needs time," Helen said, reading his expression. "You put her through the deception, the manipulation. The way you used her feelings, that's not something someone gets over quickly." "I know," Souta replied quietly. "I don't expect forgiveness. I wanted her to know that what I felt for her was real, even if everything else was a lie." "Maybe that's exactly why it hurts so much," Helen observed, because she fell in love with the real you that was hiding underneath all the deception. The man who chose truth over self-preservation at that board meeting. Before Souta could respond, the coffee shop door chimed, and Emma Whitmore entered, looking around nervously until she spotted them. She approached their table hesitantly, clearly unsure of her welcome. "Souta," she said softly, "could we talk?" "I understand if you'd rather not sit," Souta said, gesturing to the empty chair. He was surprised to find he felt no anger toward Emma anymore, just a kind of weary sadness for all the damage their families had caused. Emma looked different, thinner, more fragile, but also somehow more real than she'd ever appeared during their relationship. The polished perfection was gone, replaced by someone who looked like she'd been forced to confront difficult truths about herself and her world. "I wanted to thank you," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "for what you did at the board meeting, for exposing the truth, even though it cost you everything." "It was the right thing to do," Souta said simply. "I should have done it months ago, instead of getting lost in revenge fantasies." "I should have done it years ago," Emma replied. "Should have stood up to Mother. Should have refused the engagement to Marcus from the beginning. Should have fought for us when I had the chance." Helen excused herself tactfully, leaving them alone to navigate the wreckage of their shared past. "Would it have made a difference," Souta asked, "if you had fought for us?" Emma considered the question seriously. "I don't know, maybe. Or maybe we would have destroyed each other trying to survive in a system designed to break anyone who doesn't conform." She looked up at him with eyes that held a maturity that hadn't been there 6 months ago. "What I do know is that we were never right for each other. Not really. We were comfortable, familiar, but we weren't. Electric. The way you and Charlotte are together," Emma explained. "Even when you were lying to her, even when she was angry with you, there was this intensity between you that you and I never had. You challenged each other, changed each other. We just existed together." The observation was painfully accurate. Emma had been safe, predictable, a path toward the life he thought he wanted. Charlotte was fire and chaos and truth, demanding more of him than he'd known he could give. "For what it's worth," Emma continued, "I think you became the man you were always supposed to be. The one who was strong enough to deserve someone like Charlotte. The man who lost her through his own stupidity," Souta corrected bitterly. "The man who chose truth over revenge," Emma countered, "who sacrificed his own interests to expose corruption. That takes a kind of courage I've never had." They sat in silence for a moment, two people who'd once believed they loved each other. now understanding that what they'd shared was something lesser comfort. Habit, the illusion of love without its transformative power. What will you do? Now? Souta asked. Testify when the trials begin, Emma said. Try to make amends for the damage I helped cause. James and I are working with a victims' rights organization, helping people who were hurt by our family's business practices. She smiled sadly. It turns out there are a lot of them. Personally, I'm learning how to be alone, Emma said. How to make decisions based on what I want instead of what's expected of me. It's terrifying and liberating at the same time. When Emma left, promising to stay in touch despite their complicated history, Souta found himself thinking about transformation, how trauma could break a person down, but also, if they were lucky, rebuild them into something stronger. His phone buzzed with a text from James. Charlotte's back in town. Thought you should know. Also coffee tomorrow. I have some things to tell you about the family situation. Souta stared at the message, his heart racing despite his attempts to remain calm. Charlotte was back. It didn't mean she wanted to see him at. Probably meant the opposite, but she was back in the same city, breathing the same air. He typed, back. Coffee sounds good. And James, thank you for everything. The reply came quickly. Thank you for giving me a family I can actually be proud of. As Souta walked home through the Cambridge streets, he thought about the man he'd been. A year ago, idealistic, naive, believing that love and hard work would be enough to overcome any obstacle. That man had been destroyed by the Whitmore family's cruelty, replaced by someone calculating, and bitterhood nearly lost himself in the pursuit of revenge.
I see it.
But maybe destruction wasn't always permanent. Maybe sometimes it was necessary to burn down what you'd built on false foundations so you could construct something authentic in its place. He thought about Charlotte's words that last morning. The man you used to be would have made this right somehow. Perhaps she'd been wrong. Perhaps the man he used to be wasn't strong enough for the challenges ahead. But the man he was becoming, the one who'd chosen truth over victory, justice over revenge, maybe that man had a chance. Not at winning Charlotte back. He wasn't sure that was possible or even fair to ask of her. But at becoming someone worthy of the love she'd offered, someone who could face whatever came next with integrity intact. It wasn't redemption, not yet. But it was the beginning of the possibility of redemption, and for now, that had to be enough. 6 months had passed since the board meeting that changed everything. Souta stood outside the small legal aid clinic in Dorchester, adjusting the strap of his worn messenger bag as he prepared for another day of helping immigrants and working. Families navigate a system designed to exclude them. The work paid, a fraction of what his corporate practice had earned, but for the first time in years, he went to bed each night feeling like he'd contributed something meaningful to the world. The morning flew by in a blur of intake interviews and document preparation. It wasn't until lunch that he noticed the familiar figure sitting in the small park across from the clinic. Sketchpad balanced on her knees as she captured the chaotic energy of the neighborhood in quick, confident strokes. Charlotte. She looked different. Her dark hair was shorter, aiming her face in a way that emphasized the sharp intelligence in her green eyes. She wore simple jeans and a paint-stained sweater that somehow made her more beautiful than any designer dress ever had. When she glanced up and saw him watching through the window, she didn't look away. Instead, she offered a small, cautious smile and a wave. Souta's hands trembled slightly as he gathered his courage and stepped outside. The light here is incredible, Charlotte said as he approached, not looking up from her sketch. All those contrasts, the old brick buildings, the new construction, people from a dozen different countries sharing the same sidewalk. It's like watching a city remake itself in real time. Is that what you're doing here? Souta asked, settling. On the bench beside her, but leaving careful space between them, watching the city remake itself. Maybe, Charlotte replied, finally meeting his eyes. Or maybe I'm learning how to remake myself. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both of them aware of the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Charlotte's sketches were beautiful quick studies of children playing. Elderly men arguing over chess games, women chatting while their laundry dried on fire escape lines. Wait. I heard about your new job, she said eventually. James mentioned you were working here. It's not glamorous, Souta said. But it's honest work, helping people who actually need help. Out, like penance. Souta considered the question, maybe at first, but now it just feels right. Like this is what I should have been doing all along. Charlotte nodded, understanding. In her expression, I took a job teaching art classes at the community center in Roxbury. Teenagers mostly, kids who've never had access to real art supplies or professional instruction. She smiled, and for the first time since she'd left his apartment, that devastating morning, it reached her eyes. They're teaching me more than I'm teaching them, about art, about resilience, about finding beauty in difficult circumstances, about the difference between surviving and living. She closed her sketch pad and turned to face him fully. About forgiveness. The word hung between them, loaded with possibility and fear. Charlotte Souta began, but she held up a hand to stop him. Let me say this first, she said. I was angry for a long time, not just about the lies, but about how thoroughly you fooled me. How completely I fell for someone who turned out to be performing a role. Souta felt his chest tighten, preparing for the final rejection he probably deserved. But then I realized something, Charlotte continued. You weren't performing the important parts. The way you listened when I talked about my family's dysfunction, the way you understood what it felt like to be rejected by people who were supposed to love you, the way you saw past all their bullshit to something real, that wasn't an act. That was you. Souta's voice barely rose above a whisper. The man who used you for revenge, that was me too. Yes, Charlotte said, meeting his eyes without flinching. But so was the man who chose truth over victory when it mattered most. So was the man who sacrificed everything to expose corruption that was destroying innocent lives. So was the man who spent 6 months rebuilding his life from nothing, guided by principles instead of profit. Her fingers found his hand, tentative but certain. People aren't just one thing, Souta. We're all our choices, all our contradictions, all our possibilities. I fell in love with your contradictions, the idealist and the pragmatist, the wounded soul and the fighter, the person you were and the person you're becoming. I don't deserve a second chance, Souta said, even as his fingers intertwined with hers. Charlotte's smile was soft but resolute. Maybe not, but I'm not offering you a second chance. I'm offering you a first chance. A first chance at what? At building something real, starting from honesty instead of deception, discovering who we are together when we're not wearing masks, loving each other as we actually are instead of who we thought we should be. Something shifted in Souta's chestnut, the sharp break that had driven him to revenge. But something gentler, more vulnerable, infinitely more hopeful. I love you, he said, the words feeling both foreign and familiar. It's not the idea of you. Not what you represent, but you. Your fierce independence, your loyalty, your ability to see through everyone's pretense, including your own. I love that you challenge me to be better. I love you too, Charlotte replied. Not who you were 6 months ago, not who you might become, but who you are right now, flawed and complicated and trying to do better. When she leaned closer, Souta breathed in the faint scent of paint and vanilla that had become home to him. Their kiss was nothing like the ones before those had been performances, however convincing. This was honest, tentative, full of promise, and uncertainty in equal measure. So what happens now? He asked when they parted. Now we start over, properly this time. Coffee dates, honest conversations, the terrifying vulnerability of showing someone exactly who you are and hoping they'll stay. I'd like that, Souta said. Though I should warn you I am unemployed, morally complicated, and come with considerable emotional baggage. Perfect, Charlotte grinned. I'm a family disappointment with trust issues and a tendency toward sarcasm. We're a disaster waiting to happen. The best kind, Souta agreed. And for the first time in months, the future felt like something worth building toward. Asterisk 1 year later, Charlotte stood before the mirror in the small bridal shop, adjusting the simple ivory dress she'd chose, inelegant but unpretentious, beautiful without ostentation. Nothing like the elaborate gown her family would have expected for a Whitmore wedding. You look perfect, Emma said, appearing behind her with a bouquet of wildflowers they'd picked that morning from James's garden. The past year had transformed Emma from a brittle society princess into someone genuine and grounded, though the work of rebuilding herself continued. I can't believe you're getting married in a community center, Emma continued, smiling. Victoria would have an aneurysm. Good thing she's not invited, Charlotte replied. Victoria was serving 18 months in federal prison. Her empire of corruption finally collapsed. Richard had received probation in community service, spending his weekends teaching financial literacy to the same communities his schemes had once exploited. Through the window, Charlotte watched guests arriving at the Roxbury Community Center, where she taught art classes. Helen Chen directed the setup with military precision while James helped elderly neighbors carry folding chairs. The guest list was small but meaningful people who'd chosen to be there rather than those obligated by social convention. Nervous? Emma asked. Terrified, Charlotte admitted. But the good kind of terrified. The kind that comes with doing something real. She thought about the past year, the slow, careful work of rebuilding trust. The honest conversations that sometimes lasted until dawn, the way they'd learned to love each other's flaws instead of demanding perfection. It hadn't been easy. There were still moments when old wounds opened, when past deceptions cast shadows over present joy, but they'd faced each difficulty together, choosing transparency over comfort every time. A knock interrupted her thoughts. It's time, James called through the door. Charlotte took a deep breath, picked up her simple bouquet, and walked toward her future. The ceremony was brief and honest. Souta stood waiting, in a dark suit that had seen better days, but fit him perfectly. No pretense. No performance, just the man she'd chosen to build a life with. When he saw her walking down the aisle between her students' artwork and community center folding chairs, his smile was radiant. You sure about this? He whispered as she reached him. You've never been more sure of anything, she replied. Their vows were simple. It's honest promises to keep choosing each other, to face whatever came with. Truth instead of deception, to build something real together. When they kissed, sealing their commitment, the small crowd erupted in cheers that echoed off the cinder block walls. Later, as they danced to music from James's portable speaker, Charlotte caught sight of Marcus Sterling through the window now. Working as a night security guard, his business empire long collapsed. He watched for a moment before walking away, a ghost from a life that no longer had power over them. Regrets? Souta asked, following her gaze. Only that it took us so long to get here, Charlotte replied. To become people worthy of this. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, James approached with an envelope. Wedding gift, he said with a grin, from the Community Legal Clinic Board. They approved funding for Souta's immigrant rights project. Charlotte watched her husband's face light up with joy and purpose, and felt her own heart swell with pride. This was what love looked like when built on truth, not the desperate passion of their fake engagement, but something deeper and more enduring. They'd started as co-conspirators in a revenge plot, become real partners through pain and growth, and now stood as husband and wife, ready to face whatever came next. Not because their love was perfect, but because it was honest. Not because they'd avoided mistakes, but because they'd learned to make them together and grow stronger in the aftermath. It wasn't the fairy tale Charlotte had once imagined. It was better. It was real. Asterisk up next. You've got 2 more stand out. Stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.